The New Jersey Pinelands Commission is celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan, and we're here today with Michael Bolan, who was a member of the Commission's planning staff from September 1979 until January 1986. In addition to working for the Planning Office, Mr. Bolan was the Commission's Manager of Development Review from January 1986 to January 1987. He worked as a community planning consultant from 1987 to 2008, and he was the sole proprietor of his own planning firm from 2008 until July 2020, primarily representing municipalities. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul.
So you were one of the original members of staff on the commission. What was the office environment like when you and other staff members were tasked with drafting the Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan?
Well, when I was first hired, we were in a building in Trenton. It was the Department of Community Affairs building on State Street, and we were very cramped. And to give you an example, three of us, Bobby Zampella, Tony Esser, and myself, were all in one cubicle for one person. I didn't have a desk. I was the third person to go. And I had the little pull-out sections of the Bobby or Tony's desk when they weren't sitting there. And then I guess it was September, that maybe near the end of September of '79, that we moved to the Springfield Road building. And we had set up interviews with all of these very high-powered consultants that we were going to bring on board, and we got to the building, I think the afternoon, maybe like an hour before the interviews, and we went into the room where we were going to be interviewing the people, and the people before us had dogs, and they did not clean up after their dogs. And here we are faced with this rug that was a complete mess in this room, all these consultants coming. So we thought very quickly, rolled up the rug, threw it out the window, and that was kind of the environment that we started out with. And all of us, as you probably know, all of us, at that time there was none of the buildings that you have now. We were all in the main, the Elizabeth White House. The development review section was in the carriage house. And that was the extent of our office space. And then Bobby Zampella, Tony Esser, and I shared that office for the entire time I worked there, frankly. But it was really, despite what might seem like a very cramped space, it was also, given the nature of the plan, that it was such an interdisciplinary effort, it was very good to have us all together, because I knew what Bobby was doing, I knew what Tony was doing, they knew what I was doing. And along with Alice Diorsi, the four of us, and with Terry Moore and John Stokes, were the people who really drafted the plan. That environment, I can only describe it as bustling. We were tasked, we had the time frame in which we had to complete the plan was so short, and it was so important that we get it done within the legislative time frames, that we worked all the time, and I think we really viewed it as it was so important. I mean, it was such a sweeping and important piece of legislation. The pressures on the Pinelands at the time. One thing that is probably now forgotten is that this was also at the same time that the casinos were coming on board in Atlantic City, and in the late '70s, and the projections at that point in time, which have not proved to be accurate, but were that there was going to be anywhere from 15 to 20 casinos. And so we had that pressure on the eastern side of the Pinelands. We had the pressure from the Philadelphia metro area, you know, the counties, the western counties, Burlington, Camden, and Gloucester counties were all developing. It was very important that we get the plan done, and it was very important that we also, maybe I'm going beyond this particular question, but it was also very important that we comply with the legislation. And I guess we'll have the chance to talk a little bit more about that. But
Sure.
That was essentially the environment we were working in. And frankly, it was the most interesting thing I've worked on, I think, in my entire professional career.
Wow. So what were some of the sections? Were there particular sections of the CMP that you were assigned? How did that work?
Yeah, well, I was the planner on the planning staff. Alice D'Arcy was also a planner, and she was the special projects coordinator. But the specific items I was dealing with were, I mean, I can tell you the exact chapters. I refreshed myself by going back and looking at the plan online. And the specific chapters I did were the chapter 4, which was the man-made environment. So it was all that sort of background about the land use and planning factors that had preceded, that were current and also had preceded us in the area. And then all of the information about the resource allocation factors, then the management programs. Chapter 7, I was really responsible for doing the land capability map, which was the basis for the forest area, regional growth areas, rural development areas, pinelands, villages, and towns. I did the criteria for all of those. We did the mapping. We had a cartography department. So I worked very closely with the consultants that we had, Rogers, Golden, and Halpern, who were the consultants on the planning. They were helping us a great deal with the mapping. They were a very cutting edge planning firm in Philadelphia at the time. And then also with the law firm, Ross, Hardy, O'Keefe, Babcock, and Parsons, that we used to help us develop the management standards. But all of the items in Chapter 7 of the plan that deal with the management areas, the uses, the densities, that was the types of things I was responsible for, along with some of the resource management programs in Chapter 7.
Okay. So what do you think some of the lessons can be learned? What lessons can be learned from that process to create, adopt, implement this plan that protects the environment on a large-scale regional plan covering approximately 20% of New Jersey, which is the country's most densely populated state? What lessons can be learned?
Well, the plan itself, there was nothing really like it that we had to go on because of the sweeping nature of the legislation. That was really what piqued my interest. When I was contacted to go to work for the commission by one of the first Pinelands commissioners, a planner by the name of Bud Chabushan. And Bud had been my mentor at Rutgers when I got my graduate degree. And again, I don't want to go into an anecdote, but he had told me, it turns out that at the time the Pinelands Protection Act was adopted in June, it was adopted June 28th of 1979. I was on vacation in Cape May, and I was reading the Atlantic City Press. And the South Jersey, the legislation, I think, was passed something like 56-16. The South Jersey legislators voted against it 14-2. And so very shortly after this, I'm home. I was working I was on the research faculty at Rutgers at the time, so I was seeing Bud, and that's where he was. And he said, you got to apply for a job here, Mike. This is right up your alley. And I said, Bud, this is so political. I don't think I want to get involved with this. And he said, Mike, read the legislation. I read the legislation, and it was, frankly, it was a regional planner's dream. Piece of legislation. It's a remarkable piece of legislation to this day. I don't think it's been duplicated. We have the Highlands Council in New Jersey now, but it's somewhat different than the format that was set up. The lessons that can be learned, well, we were breaking new ground. The intergovernmental aspect of it was really unique. The fact that there would be a regional planning agency that would do this plan, and that the municipalities had to then conform their planning and zoning to that regional plan. And I think a lot of the lessons were how public involvement had to be handled, how the process of bringing municipal plans into conformance. After doing the plan, that was the main thing that I did for the next few years, was the municipal conformance process. And it was really a fascinating process, because we had to go out and convince these municipalities that this was good for them. We didn't have a lot of incentives for them, other than we had a big stick, which was the legislation and the fact that we could take over their zoning if we, the legislation really actually went that far. But I think what I learned was that you have to explain to people the rationale for why you're doing something. I remember vividly a couple of my meetings with municipalities, and where I was trying to convince them to comply with the plan, or to revise their zoning and planning. And they said, well, what, and they put me on the spot. And I said, well, what are the overall things that you're trying to do? And it was very, and, you know, I had to explain to them, you know, and frankly, the people of the Pinelands realized what they had. I mean, they realized that they had a really unique, beautiful resource. That's why they were there. And they just had some obvious reluctance to have these outsiders telling them what to do. And so you had to learn to work with those, to really be able to explain exactly what it was that was the most, what was important, and what were we trying to do here.
Sure.
And once we got over that hump, it was a tremendous process.
So as you look back now, 4 decades later, first of all, does it seem like 4 decades later? But also, right? So
it doesn't, frankly.
Right?
Even though if you compare pictures of me then to now, I don't know.
So looking back, though, what are you most proud of at that moment, and what has been accomplished since? Are there particular parts that you're is it all of it?
Yeah, well, what am I most proud of? I'm most proud of, well, frankly, I'm very proud to see that you're still in existence. And that the plan, I think, to my knowledge anyway, is still working. And that we were able to break entirely new ground with this sweeping piece of legislation that gave such authority to a regional planning agency, but also had to that had to be implemented essentially at the local level. And I think it's remarkable that the management areas that we came up with, and I think maybe when you speak to Bobby Zampella, you'll get some of this, that the management areas that we came up with the mapping that we had available at the time, really hold up to this day, that the forest area is a very important portion of the protection area, that the regional growth areas are the places where the regional growth should have been accommodated. I guess the legacy that you still exist is what I might be most proud of at this point.
That's great.
And frankly, from a personal standpoint, the fact that we were able to get it done. You know, the commission worked incredibly hard at that time. I mean, Terry was holding weekly meetings, I think, in order to throughout 1980, in order to implement this. But I'm just proud that it's lasted. I think I told you, I mean, we wrote the plan on yellow legal pads. You know, there were no computers, there was no GIS. We had Selectric typewriters, were the big step up in the office environment for the people that were the administrative staff that was producing the plan. And I'm very proud that we were able to get it done, and that it's, I think, stood up to the test of time.
Very good. Well, I very much appreciate all the hard work that was put in at that time in the early days and in the days that have followed. And I appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'd be glad to join in on anything else you'd like to. Frankly, from my perspective, it's also very nice to see that someone is thinking about the fact that you can celebrate 40 years of the Pinelands Plan.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.